that someone like Epstein is no longer really relevant for intelligence services or organized crime networks or oligarch networks in the age of technology. And why is that? So back in the day, you have Epstein and a litany of other figures like him, which I detail figures in my book. He was obviously not an anomaly at all. But that type of sexual blackmail operation comes with a lot of risk. It takes a lot of money to finance, the person who's running it, their mansion, their parties, paying off women, all of these money flows. It can be risky. And it certainly ended up being that in the Epstein case, right? Because he was kind of, he was discovered, arrested twice, and it obviously took a lot of money to cover things up, at least the first time and arguably the second time as well, where he ended up dead. So what's a better alternative? Well, if you have everyone onboarded onto digital systems that you control, like the CIA being at the origins of Google, DARPA being at the origins of Facebook, the CIA being at the origins of Oracle, and a lot of these other entities, Bill Gates and Microsoft having ties to the Maxwell family as early as the late 90s and things like that. And obviously Gates and Epstein, what does that ultimately mean? Like, I think, at this point in time, we've learned through either whistleblowers or other means that intelligence agencies access or can access pretty much any part of our digital footprint, no matter how secure we tend to think it is. And that's like with revelations about, ostensibly secure messaging apps like Signal being compromised or having had some sort of military funding in its origins or what have you. It's much easier to suck up all of Americans' communications without a warrant, and that necessarily is in the hands of a lot of these same agencies with dubious track records that have engaged in blackmail in the past, like the CIA, for example. And so, with that kind of technology, you don't really need someone like Epstein anymore. Someone like Epstein becomes expendable because you can use technology for that. And I argue in the book that Peter Thiel's Palantir was basically a repurposing of this DARPA program called Total Information Awareness that was developed by the Iran-Contra criminal who was exonerated by William Barr when he covered Iran-Contra and other notable scandals of the era up in the first Bush administration. Poindexter's considered the father of modern surveillance, and it was basically, he was running this total information awareness program. Peter Thiel and Alex Karp came to him, being connected through Richard Pearl, who has longstanding ties to the state of Israel and also the U.S. neoconservative movement, and also Netanyahu. Basically, bringing those together, looking for a way to privatize total information awareness after it came under congressional scrutiny and was ultimately defunded by Congress because of private outrage that it would eliminate the constitutional right to privacy for all Americans, which is absolutely true. But the outrage disappeared when it was entirely a private company, and Palantir was incubated by the CIA. The CIA was its first customer for its several years. It was a client, and now it's a key part of, IDF AI mass slaughter in Gaza, and has been a key part of the U.S.-Israel relationship since then. But more specifically, domestically in the U.S., it is the engine on which the warrantless mass surveillance runs. It collects everything about everyone and makes it disposable to intelligence agencies, and it's very easy to find blackmail on people with an entity like Palantir being so widely used. That
to me is really scary. The fact that, with the internet, and everybody's on the internet, and also people can plant stuff on your devices. They can.
Another great point. It's true.
So we're all blackmailable, unfortunately, at this point.
The digital era has certainly changed things, and I think that's why it's very interesting that you have sort of Epstein, after his first arrest, pivot so much towards Silicon Valley and these, major Silicon Valley CEOs whose companies were built up with national security state involvement. You have someone like Epstein, who was tied not just to sex blackmail, but arms trafficking and money laundering for intelligence, being involved with these people to a significant degree. I mean, some of these big tech CEOs like Sergey Brin and even Elon Musk were subpoenaed or attempted to be subpoenaed as part of the USVI JP Morgan case, for example, that was settled to keep the trial from happening, to keep all of that evidence out of court, arguably. But it's very problematic. And by the way, JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, the reason Jamie Dimon is CEO of JP Morgan is because of two of these mega group billionaires, the Crown family and Leslie Wexner, because they installed him as head of this Bank One, that later merged with JP Morgan. And after the merger happened, Dimon's in charge of JP Morgan. So it's really shouldn't be any surprise that Epstein did so much banking for his, trafficking operations with JP Morgan in particular. But again, not a lot of interest in looking at that, but a lot of these entities have so much influence over so many industries. And so, again, I think just focusing on specific intelligence agencies, it's important to understand that there's a lot more going on than just that. And ultimately, those spy agencies are working for somebody and are controlled by somebodies, right?